Blast it, Geralt. Your deck is incredible. Where have you found all these cards since I last saw you?
It turns out, Zoltan, I'm a magician. All I have to say is this magical incantation. How about a round of cards, Gwent specifically? They flock to play me and offer their cards along with their crowns.
I have seen that firsthand. Plus, Zoltan, you don't stand a chance with that piss-poor of a deck. You may have the mightiest Skolatel deck in the Northern Realms, but even the Royalist garbage is still garbage at the end of the day.
You better take that back, Lambert. I remember thrashing you not too long ago with your best Skellige deck. Talk about a useless deck.
Enough of your bickering, you two miserable whoresons. Honestly, I could probably give Lambert my best Nilfgaard deck, and he would squander it like a peasant trying to spar with a knight from Toussaint.
'Tis just a friendly debate, Geralt. A small spat-eye, Lambert. Anywho's, I know this isn't my place to say, but didn't you promise a Gwent tier list to all the lads and lasses of the channel?
Been keeping up in my dreams, Zoltan? I did. I am a witcher of my word, too. Zoltan, would you like to join us in this? I could really use someone with an expert opinion on Gwent here. I'm afraid Lambert won't cut it.
Wolf! You are really trying my patience.
Absolutely, I would be honored to join. Shall we begin?
So, you Gwent masters over there, what should we rate all these decks on? What are the qualifications of a good and a bad deck?
I would say, first of all, we will take in account of each deck will be at full strength. This will include all leader cards, neutral cards, and any other additional cards.
Great call, Geralt. No need to discredit a deck with starter cards, like the foot soldiers in the Northern Realms deck. We shall focus on all strategies, the balance of units, and mention certain strategies to even defeat these decks.
I choose to let Major Domo to be our opponent as he has a full inventory of cards, and I selected Gwent to be on the hardest difficulty.
Okay, I get you guys can talk about the game all day, but we have to get this done. I have a contract to do before I head home to Kira. Let's start with the Nilfgaardian deck.
The deck is one of the hardest ones to go against for any opponent. The deck reflects Nilfgaard quite well, as they have an abundance of troops, in which use is spycraft that gives them the edge in mere numbers of cards in the opponent's hand.
Agreed, Zoltan. They have a great variety in having 4 medics, 4 spy cards including the neutral cards, and high-leveled units. They also have 4 hero cards, not including the ones who are neutral. This deck can get out of hand really quickly.
Winning those tied scores can come handy as well, though it's a rarity that it helps. The thing that really set the deck over the top is the ability of the leader card, the White Flame. Once you add this from winning all the major hands in Skellige, you can literally cancel your opponent's ability. In addition to that, if you load up on decoys in your deck, you can literally steal your opponent's spies to use against them.
It's quite difficult to counter the deck. Personally, I find the Northern Realms deck does a great job in accomplishing it. If the opponent is not running the White Flame, I would encourage you to use the leader card, King of Temeria, to have impenetrable fog on command. Load up on decoys and use the spies against them. If you run out of decoys, use your few medics to revive them out of your graveyard.
If you are using the Skolatel deck, I would encourage you to do the same with the medics, because you will not be able to compete with the mere card amount. The monsters deck, you will just have to bolster your forces up front and hope you can survive. The lack of medics in this deck makes it quite difficult. In general, decoys will be your best friends.
If you are using Skellige, just focus on using the same strategy with decoys and playing to the strength of the units in the deck. For playing Nilfgaard, you just have to outperform their usage on decoys and medics yourself. It may just come down to the cards in your hand. Honestly, this deck is extremely overpowered, and it makes sense in the context of the lore of the faction. It can be defeated, but it's not going to be an easy battle. This defines the pinnacle of the Gwent factions and deserves a place on the top.
Maybe I overlooked your knowledge on Gwent Lambert, because that was a remarkable conclusion. Early in your collecting journey, this deck will be quite weak, but as you expand your search and games, you will ultimately find this deck to be so fun to play with, though you will often be spit upon by your peers who detest the Emperor.
I would have never lost my blasted cards in my games if I just used this deck, because everyone finds it so hard to beat. I agree with you both. This is the definition of being a champion, and ironically, as the White Flame notion says, to dance on your opponent's souls. It's going to be placed on the torture and mockery tier, which fits those demons of the Nilfgaard army quite well. Who's next?
I think we shall skip the monster deck for a moment, and let's talk about the most flexible of all the decks, the Northern Realms. A deck that all people who have been upon the path know about.
The Northern Realms, quite possibly, is the most balanced deck, if you include the neutral card set. Of course, the siege units are quite possibly the strongest group. This is the default deck that you start out with, and honestly, I would say majority of players won't venture out of it.
It fits well in the lore of the realms, with people like Roach, John Elias, Carrier Metz, and other individuals. The deck, in addition, has quite a few low-powered spies, in which can turn the tide in any battle. This deck, to me, is like a multi-tool, in which you can build in many different ways. It's the jack of all trades, but no master of any.
There are two ways to use the leader cards. Most will claim that Foltest, Lord Commander of the North, to clear any weather effects is the way to go. However, I find Foltest, the Siege Master, to be incredibly fun and would recommend it to you. If you can beat the ungodly hard deck of the mere mortal sitting in the Vazima Garden, blast that fool. He is incredibly hard for the early game.
Skill issue Lambert. Also, it's pronounced Vizima, you miserable oaf. In addition, you also have two medics in which can be used to revive spy cards that your enemies have used on you, or to restore your siege units, which works out quite well. Against this deck, just play to the strengths of your deck. For instance, Nilfgaard spies, the muster close combat forces of the monster deck, and the flexibility of the Skellige and Skolatel. I believe this deck belongs in the mockery tier. What says you, Lambert?
I say, just out of pettiness, that this deck belongs in good for beating merchants tier. The deck has nothing to essentially build around.
Get your head out of your arse, Lambert. This deck, most definitely, is one of the top 3 Gwent decks out there. However, I don't think it's on the same level of the Nilfgaard deck Geralt. I would place it personally on the tournament-worthy tier, which would also take Lambert's objections in account.
Fair enough, Zoltan. I understand your argument. It shall be placed there. So I have to ask you, Zoltan, and be honest here. How do you feel about the Skellige deck in here?
You know how I feel about my people and tradition. Gwent is very sacred to us, yes, and adding a new deck within the game was bound to create displeasure. However, for the few times I have faced your deck, and my respect for the people of Skellige, I truly respect this faction.
Well said. I'm personally happy to hear that from you. I will admit, I had my personal doubts when I had to gather the entirety of the deck in Toussaint. Many miles traveled, games played, and losses were undertaken. However, thrashing almost every single faction in the tournament while chasing down the higher vampire really showcases the capabilities of the deck.
Absolutely. Once I learned this deck existed, I abandoned that foolish Skolatel faction. Once I lost to Geralt, I had to find something else to use to make up for it. I personally love how if you reach round 3, you can randomly have 2 random cards from your graveyard. a huge step up from the monster's deck faction's ability.
Yet you are limited on leader cards to only 2, though you could argue only on 1 is worth using. Krach and Crate, in which reshuffles both graveyards, in which prohibits your opponent from reviving strong allies or spies from the graveyard, and allows you to reuse allies with muster abilities.
The deck is quite limited in regards to medics and spies, as you have 1 possible medic and spy from the neutral deck, so it would benefit you to use your medic quickly. I would stash a few decoys as well in your deck.
With the Skolatel deck, load up on Scorch cards to eliminate the tight Bond clanswomen that are summoned with Ceres. In addition, I would recommend placing majority of your troops that have the agility trait on the melee row to eliminate the Skellige Storm weather card. However, the ability of the monster deck counters quite well the leader's ability of the Skellige deck. I'd recommend also to run Eredin, King of the Wild Hunt, to clear any weather effects to eliminate the chance of a biting frost affecting you.
With the Northern Realms deck, just play to the advantages as usual. Just be aware to use your medics to eliminate the chance of losing your strong units to the reshuffle ability. As Nilfgaard do the same, but no need to worry about the inability to use your medics if you are using the White Flame Leader Guard to negate your opponent's ability. Lambert also forgot to mention to use the medics in your Skolatel deck, which is important. Geralt, you literally won a tournament with the Skellige deck, so it has to fit the tournament-worthy tier.
No issues here. Time to move on to the monster deck.
The monster deck is just like majority of the monsters we go against daily. Majority of the time, they are weaker individuals. But when they attack in groups, that's when they are the most dangerous. This is the primary strength of the deck. In order to take advantage of that, it can be recommended to run the leader card, Eredin, commander of the Red Riders, to boost all of those units.
Close combat troops is most definitely majority of the deck strength, as they have the muster ability. However, when it comes to the strengths of the ranged and siege units, it's extremely weak. So if your opponent has a Biting Frost card in their hand, or via their leader's ability, you can be in trouble. Thankfully, the neutral cards help out quite a bit.
You could also run the leader ability of Eredin, the King of the Wild Hunt, and just place some Commander's Horn cards so you can always have the ability to use a Clear Skies. The ability of keeping 1 card on the field is arguably the worst faction ability in the game. Having literally 1 spy and 1 medic through the neutral cards puts you in a disadvantage via your hand. So, make sure to maximize the amount of your muster cards in your deck to your hand by discarding troops with the same name.
Great point, Lambert, on the faction's ability. Honestly, this deck has a lot of weaknesses you can exploit through any deck. The best way to outsmart anyone using the deck is force them to use their muster cards and cause them to have a head as big as a fiend. When they use majority of their troops, use your Frost, and then focus on getting units in, which will outscore their nullified hand. Use your spies and medics within the Nilfgaard and Northern Realms, and you should have no problem. The Skolatel deck is the only deck that may have a problem.
Skellige has no issues as long as you don't dumbly use the Krachen Crate Leader card mindlessly. All right. I believe this deck has some strengths and has its uses, but it's outclassed by the decks above them. This deck should be placed on the competitive against other players tier.
I agree, Zoltan. Okay, here comes the hot question. Where do we place the infamous Skolatel deck? A deck in which gets a bad reputation from its mere name.
I will allow you to place the monster deck there, if only I get to express my argument with no interference on the Skolatel deck.
All right, Lambert. We will hear you out. Then I will let Zoltan describe his argument, and then I'll make the decision, as I know this could lead to a brawl.
If there is a useless tier, the Skolatel deck most definitely belongs there. As deep as the history runs throughout the realms, they have always been a group of murderous rebels, with the cause to seed hate for other races, such as us Witchers, and even your race, Zoltan. Sometimes causing unnecessary death. You both know what I'm referring to. In addition, the deck is criminally unremarkable. The only thing that saves the deck is the ability for the bulk of the higher level units to have the agile trait, in which can move your troops to the close combat, or ranged troops, in which can negate weather effects. The only leader ability that is worth using is the Hope of the End-Sided to maximize the flexibility of these units. Being able to swap those units to the row that would allow for the best strength can be a life savior. Also, the faction ability of choosing who starts the initial round is quite underpowered. Medics are your only saving grace when it comes to using any spy cards, as the deck lacks them.
Enough slander from you, Lambert. Yes, the Skolatel deck does have problems, in which can cause some great difficulties throughout playing other factions. This does not deem it unworthy, however. Using your medics, you can reuse spy cards from your enemy deck, and if you include a decoy, you can use those. To be quite frank, we have been including strategies to defeat the deck, but in the defense of this deck, I think it's best we talk about how to defeat the enemy decks. Load up on Scorn cards, as it's the easiest way to repeal high-level units. Using your agile troops to the best of your ability, place some Commander Horns in your deck. In addition, Milva can be resummoned after death through the medics, in which puts her value extremely high over a hero card.
I'm gonna take this over before it gets uncivil. Going against the Northern Realms or Nilfgaard, load up on Scorn and Decoy's cards. Place a Torrential Rain in your deck for the Northern Realms, and ensure the Shrew card can be used to scorn the siege units. You can also use it to bait your opponent to use their Scorn cards, if you were going against another Skolatel deck. If you are facing a monsters deck, I would most definitely suggest placing a couple of Frost cards to ensure you can outsmart the numerous close combat cards. Scorn cards will also come in handy. For Skellige, just follow the same idea, but remember, any cards you scorn can return it, and also to use your medics before they reshuffle your graveyard into your deck. So here's my verdict, and I hope you both can respect it. It is true that this list indeed does have a useless tier. I would also suggest that the Skolatel is the weakest faction in the whole entire game. Even saying that, it has a purpose in the game, and I have lost to a deck or two of the faction before. I think there is no deck that belongs to a useless tier, because all decks have pros and cons. Therefore, the useless tier merely exists to showcase the point that no deck is useless. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
I don't know who the hell Ted is, and what he has to do with Gwent, but I'm thankful for him. I may disagree with the fact that it is the weakest faction, but it may because I am just a master at using it. I will concede and place it on the possibly beat a merchant tier.
I think you are spending too much time with that pompous little poet of yours, Dandelion. You made it seem you were writing a novella on how much bullcrap you can muster to prove that point. I completely disagree. Speaking of books, been reading up on the ancient history of you, Geralt. You are quite an enigma. Perhaps the viewers would like to hear our rankings of a little thing called the Witcher series.
Lambert with a good idea? Better watch out. The trolls are about to become the brains of the monsters' revolution. I think that's a grand idea. Viewers, make sure to smash that like button if you would like to see that. Let's aim for 25 likes. I know you all can do that. Also, please consider supporting our endeavors here on the path and subscribing for more. Almost 97% of you are not subscribed. I would love to have your support, train you in the ways of the Witcher, and have you fighting alongside me on this wondrous journey.
Before all that, what you say to a rematch, Geralt? Loser has to pay for the drinks we've been having?
Let's do it. I'll even give you a chance and use my Skola Tel deck.
Kira is going to be pissed, but I can't miss this. Let's go, Zoltan.